So thank you very much, Alberto, for meeting us today, and especially on such a short notice. It's fantastic to have you here for our 4th episode of our podcast, Drip by Drip, Unveiling Fashion's Thirsty Truths. This episode is supposed to be dedicated to the brand view of water consumption and also legislations around making fashion production more sustainable. And I'm really, really happy that we can talk to you, because you're coming from a company with a really long history of obviously different fashion production, but also denim, which is always one of the most pressing issues when it comes to fashion production and water consumption. So I'm really, really happy to hear from your point of view today and your company's point of view how you're dealing with the production of your denim, which is biodegradable. So like the top-notch sustainable version of a denim piece, and to learn more about your vision, your mission, how you came to the state where you are today in terms of sustainability, and also your vision of how the future of sustainable fashion can evolve. So let's start with our very first question, which I ask all of our guests, and that's, what's the most shocking fact about your industry in terms of water that you came across since you're working in the industry that you feel like everybody needs to know?
Well, thank you, first of all, Amira. The most shocking fact that really got me when I started to work in this industry about 20 years ago was the amount of water that denim requires for the yarns to be washed and not really dyed. Let me explain a bit better, because as Candiani, we're fabric makers, we are denim makers, we are a denim mill. So before the brand, we have a big industrial operation, which is 95% of our business, and that is pure textile, and what we produce is denim. And people suddenly think that indigo takes so much water to get dyed into the yarns, but that is not really the biggest amount of water that goes into the process. Actually, it's a small fraction. Even myself, when I approached the company as a 20 years old, I was impressed by the fact that it takes way more water to wash the yarns after you dye them with indigo. Supposedly, you can say that a full dye lot would require, maybe 20 to 30% of the water to dye the yarns, and that goes into the yarn, so it doesn't get wasted. But then you have 70% more to wash the yarns, and that is the water that most people don't know how to optimize, recycle, so it gets discharged, which is a real shame. And of course, as Candiani, we prevented that thanks to the adoption of ultrasounds complementing the washing baths, and that is saving a very big amount of water, up to 50% of what used to be prior to the ultrasound technology was installed. And that also helps to clean the water and have a lesser contamination, so that the water can be reused or sent to the finishing, for instance, or we can generate vapor to generate energy. So yeah, that was I know it's a little technical, but it was the most important thing that came across when I realized that most of the water we used in the dyeing is not to dye, but to wash the yarns.
And can you explain how that ultrasound technology works? Like, does it filter the color pigments somehow from the water, or what happens in the process?
Not really. It just optimizes the washing performance. Ultrasounds work with very micro but incredibly strong vibrations, and those vibrations help the water to clean the surface of the yarns. Something special about indigo, it's a color that only sticks to the superficial part of the yarn, which is why when you wash your denims, or it goes to white because the center of the yarn stays white. But that also means that in order to get good quality, the actual washing of those yarns has to be excellent. Otherwise, you encounter the usual blue fingers and blue hands, and blue underwear, what we call bleeding of indigo, or crocking, technically speaking. So you don't want to do that. I mean, it's the purpose of good quality is that indigo doesn't bleed at all, and that requires a specific washing for the yarns, which again ultrasounds are facilitating. They are increasing the performance of the wash in a very, very efficient way. So the extra indigo, if you will, gets removed faster, and it's much, much easier to detach it from the yarn. So you have to consume way, way less water.
Amazing. And may I ask very bluntly, because we hear a lot from companies that such technical innovations are costly, and that in some terms they decide against it because it wouldn't be cost efficient in the end to produce their products. So how did that affect your business to change to such a really purposeful technology?
Well, what you just said is normally true, but not in this case. The investment we had to sustain in order to install the ultrasound technology on our dyeing ranges wasn't that big, but most of all, it gives you an immediate type of savings. So the investment return is quite fast, and I'm pretty shocked not many other mills did it, because this is not really covered by a patent. It's just about the engineering and whatever. I mean, also a little bit of the creative R&D process in order to make your performance more efficient, and it is very, very beneficial. And also what's very important is that once we started to dye with the ultrasounds, the color range didn't change. So it's not that we had to redo recipes and formulas. I mean, it's just the same, and that's very, very important, because sometimes you adopt a new technology, but then the industrial process would change, and maybe you're not able to replicate the same product you used to do. But this wasn't the case. Again, the investment itself not so big, very, very effective and efficient. So it's a good example of an immediate improvement, which, as I said, should be adopted by the industry as a standard.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never actually heard about that you can produce more sustainably and at the same time it's cost effective, or you're even saving. So this should definitely be on the bigger stages of the fashion fairs and events, I think, and be promoted. So
yes, true.
I also read that your company, which is a family-owned business and has been running for decades, is in a special natural environment in Italy, which basically made you or regulated the way you produce at a very early stage, even before sustainability became fashion and everybody wanted to adopt their production processes. Would you say that this has been an advantage because you automatically were somewhat of a first mover in the sustainability field, or was it a disadvantage because you had higher costs or anything at the very beginning?
Well, certainly both. I mean, I see it now as a big advantage. But if you talk to my father or my great-grandfather, the sustainability, as you said, wasn't even a word or a concept back then. But being located in such a specific environment, as you mentioned, required major investments and extra costs that the rest of the industry didn't have to sustain, just because we are the only large textile operation physically located in a nature reserve. But then, if you ask me, it became an advantage. What we had to do was, simply we had to talk about it, how we do things. We had to be transparent about the processes and also the best practices we had to create ourselves in order to comply with a very special environment. But if we go back to my grandfather and my father, they didn't even know what sustainability was, but they knew for sure what efficiency was. And if you narrow it down to an industrial concept, efficiency really is the grandfather of sustainability. You don't want to waste anything. You want to reuse everything. We make denim. It's a large textile cotton type of operation where margins are extremely low. So if you want to make a little money, you better be very efficient.
Yeah, very true. And you also, I would say invented, but I'm not sure if that term is correct, a completely biodegradable jeans, which is one of the innovations your company made. Can you explain what the changes to that product were to make it fully biodegradable?
Yes, let me clarify one point.
Yes.
If we're talking 100% cotton denim, most denims would be biodegradable. If they're properly made, if they do not contain weird stuff in the dyeing or in the finishing type of products. But on paper, indigo yarn dye denim, 100% cotton, should be biodegradable by default. What we invented is the stretch version for it.
Exactly.
Most stretch denim is made with the synthetic elastomer, and those elastomers are not biodegradable. They do not biodegrade together with the cotton. So we invented the first biodegradable and compostable stretch denim by adopting a very specific type of natural rubber, which makes it also bio-based as a fact. And this natural rubber has more or less the same performance of the synthetic elastomers when it comes to elasticity, when it comes to shrinkage, to the recovery and all those physicals. But it biodegrades together with cotton if it goes into compost. Obviously, it doesn't biodegrade if you just wear it. The rubber.
Of course.
But I got that question so many times. So what happens if you sweat and it rains? Nothing happens. I mean, the natural rubber has an amazing performance. It's covered by the cotton, just like the synthetic elastics. But once again, if it goes into compost, then it, together with cotton, it would biodegrade and it would go compostable as well.
Amazing. Fantastic product. I actually can't wait to see it and feel it at some point. So my next question would be, obviously at Drip by Drip, we're dealing a lot with the CSDDD legislation in general. We have a supply chain law in Germany installed for the past 2 years, which has been highly debated. And now the CSDDD has been voted for and is starting to regulate the fashion industry in Europe. However, for Germany, for example, it means that the German law might be decreased in terms of how it regulates the companies or how many companies are affected by the law. So there's a lot of debate going on. How do you, as an entrepreneur in the fashion industry, feel about laws, regulations coming from governments or even bigger institutions such as the EU? Do you think this is the way forward to help that industry move forward in terms of becoming more sustainable? Or would you rather say that as an entrepreneur, you have all the abilities and all it's basically your choice to make how you want to produce? What's your stake on that?
I'm going to sound a little cocky here, but I believe entrepreneurs should be listened to way more than what has happened in the recent years, where legislation started from a more intellectual or philosophical perspective and didn't really land on anything good or pragmatic. What I mean is due diligence and is a very technical thing. And unfortunately, it cannot really be based on a purely philosophical or ethical kind of parameter. I would say that legislation has to happen, absolutely, but it has to happen properly. I think Europe mismanaged many things during this, let's say, Green Deal years. I think we should really pay attention to what we do in Europe, but we should also pay attention to what we import into Europe from other countries, which seems to be very, very difficult to do. And I didn't see any real effort in that direction. But Europe has definitely started the challenge of who's the greenest continent in the world. And I'm happy. I'm proud of that. The problem is that when you start such a challenge, you should be perfectly aware of what you're doing. And my impression was that, especially when it comes to textiles, and we lost most of our textiles or manufacturing operations within the EU boundaries in the past 20 years, I believe it wasn't really a strategical factor for the EU. So things were not taken properly or seriously enough. Now, I mean, in Germany, there's a big issue with the EVs, the electric vehicles, and the car industry falling apart. And I hear numbers that they recall, in a way, the number of jobs we have lost in Italy in textile world, in the textile sector in the past 20 years. We certainly lost over 1 million jobs between textile and manufacturing. And I mean, I don't want this to happen in Germany. I don't want it to happen to the car industry. I don't want it to happen in Europe. But that means that legislation and regulations have to be approached in a way more technical sense. And that would definitely require the entrepreneurs to be part of it.
So what if you were invited to the table now for amendments that could be made to the law? Would there be anything specific you would say? Because our last podcast episode was with a member from the EU Parliament, a member from the German Green Party, who was part of the whole process from a very early stage. So what would you say they would need to change in order to make the law more applicable or more reasonable?
Well, first of all, to go and see where they do things, where they make things. I have the impression that too many politicians, they make their statements and they build up, let's say, their philosophy without really knowing the difficulties or what it takes to run business or a specific operation. So again, we lost already too much of our manufacturing capability in Europe. And this is because the politicians have been way too detached from it. They've never been like to a company like mine. It's incredibly rare that I get a visit from the institutions. And I am the largest consumer of cotton in Europe. I mean, it's a pretty large company, the one we run, and it's a pretty good case of, made in Italy excellence, if you will. Now, I don't want to call it myself, but we belong to that type of thing, and we seem to be zero influentials. And again, the other recommendation, as I mentioned, would be, guys, let's secure the borders. Let's really look into what comes into Europe. So if you want to give me challenge to become better and better and greener, I take the challenge, but you take care of what's coming in from wherever country where the regulations are completely different, but those products are flooding into the EU and we have no control on them whatsoever.
And by those products, you probably, if I may assume, mean cheaper products coming from Asia that are in competition to the products that are made within the EU, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I get that. We also, we in our discussions with brands, we often talk about the fact that many of the brands don't even know where they receive their raw materials from. They usually have a supplier or even middlemen who basically make the deals with cotton farms or bigger corporations, and then they don't even know where their cotton comes from. How do you handle that at Candiani? Do you know where your cotton comes from, and do you have direct relationships to maybe not the person who's actually taking the cotton from the plant, but the whole let's say community around them?
Look, at Candiani, we source 3 different types of cotton. What's called conventional, which is also certified by BCI, the Better Cotton Initiatives, which gives you a certain level of transparency and traceability. We source organic, and we only source organic from 2 origins out of Africa, and we know exactly where it comes from. And we source regenerative cotton out of Europe, Spain in particular, and US. And we go to the farm with our traceability. And obviously, the whole supply chain has to be supported by the traders, and there's a bunch of middlemen here and there, but I would say things are changing for the good. Transparency and traceability are certainly required tools to improve our industry, and I think we are on a good path, at least in Europe. But then it really depends on the brand, how much they want to invest in it, how much transparent you want to be, what is your interest there. I mean, too many brands, unfortunately, nowadays have zero interest to be transparent because they have nothing to disclose, nothing good to disclose. So they rather keep it quiet and silent instead of starting this process. And as I said, at Candiani, being an industrial operation, dealing with the fiber in first place, we have to cover that. We have to take care of that because we're accountable for that.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so too. But obviously, not everybody who's an entrepreneur in the fashion industry feels that way. So if you say that the legislation process, I understand that it hasn't been done perfectly well, but you're also thinking or saying that the legislation is maybe not the right tool to make this whole industry become more sustainable and maybe move towards a circularity approach. So what do you think would help companies from that industry to make that move, to not only regard the whole sustainability thing as a compliance mechanism, but to use it as some sort of tool or instrument to become future-proof business enterprises? Is there anything you would say consumers or maybe NGOs such as ours can do to help that process if legislation is not the right instrument for that?
Legislation can be the right instrument or a complementary instrument to that. As I said, legislation is needed and required by the industry, otherwise people wouldn't change. But that's one side of the business. The other side is the consumer, as always. So the consumer has to be, I don't want to say influenced, but probably more instructed by legislators and institutions so they can make a better choice. But at the same time, I'm confident the digital product passport would be a good thing if properly made. Now, it doesn't seem like this is going to happen tomorrow morning, and it will take time to fix it and adjust it. But the digital product passport may be a tool for the legislators to talk to the end consumer and to engage the end consumer in order to have making better choices. I'm positive about that, as much as I am positive about the circular design guidelines I've seen. Those are decent and they're totally doable. Once again, there's a little bit too much of a gap between the institutions and the end consumer when it comes to those topics in particular. So NGOs like yours are definitely talking about it. And there's a bunch of more sensitive consumers which are already interested in what we're talking about, and they're probably ready to make more responsible choices or better choices, as you prefer. But we all know that nowadays, if you want to go for a more sustainable product, you also have to spend a little more, 99% of the cases. And I believe the EU in particular should give some type of competitive benefits to the EU industry so we can be more competitive, and the EU consumers, or the global consumer can really benefit from a better made product, and finally also have the tools to compare this product to the others which are not as good. But it's very tricky, and I believe we're in the beginning of an era, and we shouldn't be frustrated about that. We all wish it was 2030 and things were done, and you scan your product and it tells you all the consumptions and all of that and how green it is and whatever. We're not there yet, but we should be excited about the build-up. We should be excited about the path to get there.
But so that means you believe that if the consumers get all the information that are now not as easy to find for them about a product, so where does the cotton come from, how has it been, or where has it been produced, so on and so forth, do you really think that this is going to change the buying or purchasing decision of the consumers to the better and not the price in the end? Because in Germany, we discuss this a lot, because maybe internationally, actually, because inflation is high, even though it's on a low right now, but it was high the last couple of years, and we know it's going to come again, or it's going to increase again. And in the end, the purchasing decision is made via the price tag, because if people have less money in their pockets, then they will always make the decision based on the price. So what do you think will be the real benefit of the price tag if like living conditions are decreasing in Europe, and at the same time salaries are not increasing, and it's getting, like, socially it's getting more stressful in the EU? Is that really going to make a shift in the industry?
Unfortunately, you're right. So price comes first, and will come first in the next 10, 20 years, for sure. But if we are able to give to the end consumer those data, those numbers, and I'm talking about the real ones, the credible data and the credible numbers, then the impact of the product may become the reason number 2 after the price. Which is already very, very important. And as I said earlier, I think it's time for the EU to come up with some ideas to make the EU more competitive, because it's such a shame not to create this opportunity where you make beautiful things, but they have to cost more because, because of too many reasons. I can start and talk for hours about the reasons why everything is more expensive in the EU, and manufacturing is incredibly more expensive than any other place in the world. But I don't want to get there, and I don't want to talk about how to subsidize the industry. That's not the way, obviously. But I think there is a plan. There could be a plan to make our manufacturing more competitive, which doesn't mean cheaper, but more competitive.
Yeah, and which would always also benefit the production facilities in the global south, obviously, because they wouldn't have to lower their prices as much in order to stay competitive with the Western producers, basically. So eventually it would benefit everyone, because obviously this circle going down with the prices in the global south is not supporting anyone there either. And at the same time, their environments are completely devastated and killed. So that's obviously not the way to move forward.
Absolutely. I can give a stupid example, but I personally think that VAT, or the tax we call IVA in Italy, I don't remember how you call it in German, but it shouldn't be applicable for EU products. I think that's already, and this is a good example for things that should be staying competitive instead going cheaper, because the only real benefit of removing such a specific tax goes to the end consumer. It doesn't relate really to the rest, to the supply chain itself, but it's a benefit for the end consumer that all of a sudden would, find a 20, 18, 22% discount on the EU-made product. But again, this is my own personal idea or proposal, if you will. There are many ways to make us more competitive, for sure. It's just a matter of will, and it's a matter of economics. And when Mr. Mario Draghi was speaking the other day about this Marshall Plan #2, I believe more or less, I could read between the lines. More or less, this should be part of the plan going further.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And also, it's really nice to hear some practical suggestions, because everybody, when we ask those questions, everybody is kind of staying vague, because you don't want to say anything that you could get criticized for in a way. So it's very refreshing to hear like a proper proposal of how things could change. So thank you for that. And this text, by the way, has a perfectly German name. It's called Umsatzsteuer or Mehrwertsteuer. So the VAT, the VAT has a very, very German name here. So Alberto, I have a very last and final question, which is, do you have a fact about water, since you're working in an industry that's water that's consuming a lot of water, and your products also? Is there anything that you think everybody who's listening to us today should know to understand the urgency of making better consumption choices, to make them understand that the water problems in the global south, of decreasing levels of fresh, clean drinking water for the people in the production countries, like that this has something to do with us here as well? Anything that you would like to share as a final word from you?
Sure. From one end, I would like to share the fact that cotton requires water to grow, right? Mm-hmm. But people nowadays think that it's a total waste of water, the one required by cotton to grow, without considering that probably 50% of the cotton on the planet grows because it rains. And there are also reservoirs made with raining water, which is not drinkable water. And those reservoirs can feed the cotton plants. And I just visited one in Spain, and I was very much impressed by the way they manage the water. But at the same time, it's also true that in certain countries, there's a total abuse of water, not just to grow cotton, for agriculture in general. And this is becoming a serious problem. But the best practices are there, and the technology is evolving. I like the drip story, the dripping.
Drip, you mean drip irrigation?
Yes, and it suits your podcast as well. I mean, that's a good example of how technology has improved. But here we're talking about best practices. Unfortunately, when it comes to must-consume type of agricultural products, we still cut corners, and we do not adopt best practices. We just abuse the resources of the planet, and that is a huge mistake. Look, as we said, we're located in a nature reserve around the river Ticino, which I believe is the second most important river in Italy. And we're plenty of water, but not because of that we feel like we can take as much as we want. Actually, because of the local, the nature reserve institutional type of regulation, we are obliged to consume a certain amount of water, but also to discharge the water in a very specific way. So it goes to water treatment, which is another beautiful facility we own, in order to respect the water and respect the river. Water will certainly be a major issue going forward. And I'm talking to you while it's pouring outside and it's raining like crazy in Milano. Again, we don't lack the water here. We don't really lack the water in northern Italy in general, but we're learning how to respect the water, and this is because legislation is there. So once again, legislation has its own relevance and importance when it comes to water. And then just a funny thing, but I think people are used to wash their denim way too much, So just to conclude, let me say, please don't wash your jeans every single time you wear them. I mean, it's such a shame, and it's not even needed. So try to be more responsible with your laundry machine and save some water at home as well, because domestic use can also make a massive impact.
True. Alberto, that was the perfect closing word. So let me just thank you for taking the time to enlighten us with your experiences and your views. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and I hope we can stay in touch.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.